Tom, you're joining us live now. I know everyone's still sort of going through these documents, but it's been an hour or so. What have we learned?
Tom, I'll give you kind of the gist of what we're seeing. The Justice Department opened a website and they published all sorts of government reports having to detail with Epstein, his death, the non-prosecution agreement, which of course garnered so much controversy back in 2007. They've also released a significant amount of court filings in civil court filings, many of which we've already seen or reported on previously. They do have 4 volumes that appear to be new, or at least information that they haven't previously released before in this form. All told, that's 3,500 files. Now, some of those files have multiple pages attached to them. It's totaling more than 2.5 gigabytes of material. That includes investigative reports and photos. Some of those photos that we're seeing do involve prominent people in American politics, including former President Bill Clinton. A photograph of him in a hot tub. You're looking at that photograph there. There's an additional person in that photograph, a little tricky to see, whose face is redacted. But, of course, as we've reported in the past, the former president denies any sort of wrongdoing. And it's important to remember that in July of this year, this Justice Department and FBI under the Trump administration has said that there's not even enough new information to even open a case, Tom, let alone bring a successful prosecution against any uncharged third parties beyond Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, who were, of course, convicted in the case of Maxwell, convicted in the case of Epstein, died by suicide in a Manhattan federal prison. As far as the other pieces of information that we're getting from this, it does appear that the Justice Department and the FBI did continue their investigation in southern Florida even after Epstein signed that non-prosecution agreement, traveling to Australia to interview a potential victim. And there are a number of case files going back to 2019 when they successfully brought a case against Epstein, or in the process of trying to successfully bring a case against Epstein in 2019 that have to do with the FBI here in New York and the NYPD. Some of that information, Tom, includes photographs that are very disturbing, that are heavily redacted or redacted in full, and some of those have been labeled CSAM, or child sex abuse material. To be clear, the Justice Department has made sure that there are no photographs of any individuals that could identify their faces or any sort of other identifying characteristics in those photographs, but obviously deeply disturbing.
Yeah, Tom, before you go, there have been other sort of strange photographs, if you will. There are some of Jeffrey Epstein with Michael Jackson, but the context of a lot of these photos is still not understood completely at this hour.
You know, that's what makes it so difficult, Tom, is that a lot of these photographs are undated. They come in the form of these files, so we're not clear whether they originate from the FBI's investigation in Florida, whether they originate from any sort of a local Palm Beach Police Department investigation, which, of course, kicked this off. Those case files are in here, too. And it's not clear whether or not those documents were uncovered at Epstein's mansion, when we were told that multiple boxes of photographs were recovered in a search warrant in 2019 after he landed in Teterboro, New Jersey, to the surprise of federal handcuffs. So that's at least the initial indication of this as it stands before Nightly News on Friday afternoon. But, of course, given the size and scope and volume of this, and the fact that the Deputy Attorney General of the United States said earlier today that they are not releasing today all of the documents, they still have more to make public. We don't know yet what is and isn't in these documents.
Yeah, we'll keep digging through those documents as we get ready for the broadcast tonight. All right, Tom, we thank you for that. We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app, or watch live on our YouTube channel.